Is Latin a waste of time or one of the most powerful educational tools we've quietly abandoned? In a world filled with coding, AI, and modern languages, Latin can feel outdated, unnecessary, even irrelevant. But what if we're asking the wrong questions? What if the better question is, what kind of mind are we trying to form? Today, I want to explore both sides of the conversation honestly. Why people advocate for Latin, why others push back, and what the real return on investment really is. Welcome to another episode of Rose Resource Room. I'm so excited to be diving into this topic with you. So first, I want to start with the pushback. Because not everyone agrees that Latin can be fundamental or foundational. The first critique you may hear is, it's a dead language. And yes, it's not spoken conversationally today. You're not going to use Latin to order food or travel, but that critique assumes the goal is communication, when the goal may be formation. People often point to the slow payoff. Latin honestly does not give quick wins. It's cumulative. It takes time. So in a fast-paced world, that can feel frustrating. Your child may learn Latin, and you're not going to see the return on investment immediately. You can give them a quick lesson in Spanish, and then they can go outside and say to their neighbor, "Hola, ¿cómo estás?" And that feels like a quick win. Latin doesn't always give you that. The third is the opportunity cost. Time spent on Latin could go towards coding, modern languages, or career skills. So for families, that's a real consideration. If you're a parent who's constantly juggling discipleship, academics, character formation, stewardship, languages, sports, and all the things, Latin may just feel like one more thing to add. And for people who had a poor experience personally, or whether teaching or learning it, it feels like too much memorization, not enough meaning, no connection to real ideas. And honestly, that may feel like a valid reason to walk away because of how it's taught. So now let's get into some benefits. Because like I shared, as parents, when we're homeschooling, we are constantly making decisions about time. Every subject has to earn its place. Is this useful? Is this practical? Is it worth the effort? And understandably so, because life is full, capacity is real. But here's a tension. Some subjects don't just produce outcomes, they shape how a child thinks. And Latin is one of those subjects. And I'm sure a lot of Latin scholars would argue that Latin is not just the subject, it's a foundation. So let's start with a mindset shift. Latin is not primarily about speaking. It's not about travel. It's not about conversation. Latin is about thinking. It's a structured, logical, systematic, highly organized language, very similar to math in the way it trains the brain. It requires attention, precision, mastery. Think of it more like intellectual training. Latin doesn't just teach words, it teaches how the language actually works. So let me walk you through a framework that actually helped clarify this for me over time. Latin actually builds on phonics. It takes a child from simply reading words to understanding structure. And that's because Latin roots make up a huge portion of English, especially the academic vocabulary that students struggle with later on. So think of the word multilingual. Someone may not know what that means, but if you understood that multi or multi means many, and lingua means language, then someone who is multilingual is someone who speaks many languages. If you see a bicycle and you understand that the word tri means three, you understand that that bicycle with three wheels is actually a tricycle. Now, you may not have a child who will be a scientist or a doctor or a theologist. You also don't know that. And a lot of reasons people give for studying Latin is like, oh, don't you want to go to the zoo and to be able to see the domain, the kingdom, and all the phylum listed in Latin? And you may say no, because right above or below it is the English. So that may not really be a powerful draw for you. But I will say that Latin is the language of science. Biology, medicine, chemistry, so much of the terminology is Latin based. Same thing for law. It's foundational to law, to government, to theology and logic. These systems were shaped using Latin language and categories. And one that often surprises people is that it's the most effective way to learn English because it makes grammar visible. English is comprised of over half of the words are Latin. 60% of the English grammar is made up of Latin. So I don't know if you've ever seen those funny videos where someone will hold up a card and they'll say READ. That's read, right? And I'm like, yeah. Okay, so how do you spell the past tense of read? Read, READ. Okay, so if READ is read, then LEAD must be led. Oh, but then it's also lead. But lead is also LED and red is also RED. So how do you know when to add the A and when to take it out? Latin is actually systematic and has very clear rules, unlike English. Another thing that's really interesting about Latin is that it prepares students to learn other languages more easily because Latin is the father of the Romance languages. So whether you wanted to pursue Italian or Spanish or French or Portuguese, it's very important to understand Latin because just by studying one, you can quickly cover the 5 Romance languages. And because it teaches so systematically, it actually helps with other languages that are not Romance languages. So in that way, it trains and disciplines the mind because you have to have focus, accuracy, and attention to detail. What's also important is that it strengthens thinking across subjects, not just language, but science and even math vocabulary. Latin is transformative because it builds habits like perseverance and intellectual stamina. So remember when I was talking about all the different things in terms of academics and stewardship and discipline, this one core piece of Latin can train all of that. So rather than breaking all these things up and now we're doing academic training and then we're doing character and life skills and all the other things that we as homeschoolers have to take into consideration, Latin can actually do all that for you. It's a language of Western civilization because it connects students to history, to theology, and original text in a deeper way. So when you step back, you start to see this. Latin is not just another subject, it is a keystone. So Latin acts as an organizing principle for learning. It doesn't just add more to your plate, it actually helps everything else make sense because vocabulary becomes easier, grammar becomes clearer, and other subjects start to feel more connected. So if you're thinking about return on investment, if your goal is quick results, Latin may not be the best fit. But if your goal is long-term growth, Latin is a compounding investment. It strengthens reading, it sharpens writing, it builds disciplined thinking, and it multiplies the effectiveness of other subjects. So it doesn't just give you something new, it makes what you're already doing stronger. So I get it. We need to be practical. We need to make sure that we're using our time wisely, but Latin should not feel like one more overwhelming thing. It works best when it's gentle, consistent, and connected to meaning. A few words, a few roots, a little bit at a time, because the goal isn't pressure. The goal is formation. So should you study Latin? Well, if you want speed and a quick checkbox, there are absolutely better options. But if you want depth, if you want to build strong thinkers, if you're playing the long game, Latin is hard to beat. Because in the end, This isn't just about language. It's about what kind of learner you're raising and what kind of foundation you're building beneath everything else. I'd love to hear from you in terms of, are you pro-Latin? Are you not convinced? Are you somewhere between? Are you anti-Latin? And if you're homeschooling, how are you deciding what's worth your time right now? I'd love to know all the things that you've chosen as it relates to language and grammar and Latin specifically. So feel free to add that in the chat so I can come back and hear what you're thinking. But just remember that Latin is the next step after phonics because it moves from decoding to understanding structure. It makes up a huge part of English, 60%, especially academic vocabulary. Latin is the language of science vocabulary. It is the language of law, government, logic, and theology. And it is the most efficient way to learn English grammar. Latin prepares students to learn any language. It trains and it disciplines the mind. It strengthens thinking across subjects. It is transformative, and it's the language of the Western world. It actually simplifies curriculum because it strengthens multiple subjects at once. So it acts like a hub instead of an add-on. Latin should not feel like overload. You can start small with songs, just focusing on rhythm, not rigor. Pair it with reading and storytelling. So again, it has high return on investment if you want strong readers, deep thinkers, classical or faith-based education, and long-term academic success. Latin compounds. It's not just a quick return, it's a growing return. Let me know what you choose.